we're kicking off this week's podcast with a discussion about a recent report that details some major changes coming to Marvel television. So
Mhm.
I don't know if listeners know this or not, but shameless plug is coming. We have a two-part episode that details the state of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You got to go check that out right now if you already haven't. But the reason I bring that up is because we dedicated an entire segment to talking about some of the challenges that were revolving around Marvel television and their transition to streaming. A lot of these
Mhm.
Disney Plus shows that just not have not worked for us, frankly. And funnily enough, the timing has been somewhat apropos, I would say, because recently an article in the Hollywood Reporter by Boris Kidd, he put together a great article about some very, very significant changes that will be coming to Marvel's TV division, not only with some upcoming specific shows, but really with their entire philosophy. There's a lot to get through with this article. There's a couple of key things that I think we have to, sort of detail and break down. So let's just kind of go section by section and talk about this and share our thoughts and reactions to this news because it is quite significant here. The first major thing that this article really details is the updates around Daredevil Born Again. Now, I think we all
Mhm.
know that's an incredibly important show that's going to be coming out within the next couple of years at this point. But one of the things that was noted is that before the writers and actor strike started, fewer than half of the series' 18 episodes had been shot. But
Mm.
from what the Marvel executives had seen up until this point, they weren't pleased. It was not a show that was working, and notably, Kevin Feige was just not pleased at the overall development of how this show was moving and all the stuff that they had gathered up until this point. And so, quietly in September, Marvel had let go all of the series writers and directors, including Chris Ord and Matt Corman, who were sort of operating as the head writers for this series. And they are essentially undergoing a creative reboot. They're kind of scrapping most of what they've gotten and plan to start from scratch almost essentially. They did note in this article that they will keep some things that have been shot will eventually transfer over, but they're really looking to remake this entire show, and the studio currently is on the hunt for new writers and new directors to come on and helm the project. But from what they had seen and the footage that they had captured in the episodes that they shot, apparently Chris Ord and Matt Corman had kind of crafted a legal procedural that didn't look anything like the Netflix version of the series that we saw all those years ago, those 3 seasons, which, is notably known for its violence, its maturity,
Mhm.
its action. Apparently, none of that was there. And also, what this article outlines is that Charlie Cox, who plays Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, apparently was not going to don the costume until the fourth episode. So
Sheesh.
we're going quite an extensive amount of time without even seeing him suit up as the Daredevil, sort of character that we've come to know and love him as. And so
Mhm.
again, Daredevil Born Again, it's almost kind of going back to the drawing board, which is it's becoming a bit of a consistent thing that we've seen across a few of these projects lately. We know Blade has had some similar redevelopment. Secret Invasion underwent a lot of redevelopment over the course of the multiple years that they crafted that show. How does this make you feel? Obviously, there's bigger context with Marvel TV, but with Daredevil specifically, as anticipated of a show that is, how does this make you feel that they have seen what they have, they decided that it wasn't working, and now they're just going to go back to square one?
Man, it's so interesting because part of me feels like this is a good thing in a lot of different ways, right? Where I wish Marvel had done this more often, or else our state of the MCU pod may not have been necessary. But there is, I think, a level here that's like, man, y'all have what how many they have? You said not even 8 episodes, right? Of an 18 episode show. I mean, if the first 7 you watch it and you go, dang, it ain't working. I mean, I can't possibly continue with the rest of the 10, 11 episodes that need to be done. And I think that's a smart decision on Marvel's part not to force that, right? It feels like some of these other projects that could have even been the case, but they had to, well, we got to finish it out. Well, we have to do this and do that. And so part of me feels like this is a good thing. If they feel like it's not good, scrap it and try again. Again, unfortunately, it doesn't always work like that, right? Unfortunately, everybody doesn't always get that opportunity. But it sounds like, look, it sounds like to me, Daredevil is one of the babies they're trying to take care of right now, right? I always talk about Iron Man, Captain America, Spider Man. These are all characters. I always feel like they know they have to take care of, and it feels like, from my point of view, that Daredevil has become that character And Kevin Feige's like, look, if we're not shepherding Daredevil in right, then this thing can't work. This is not going to work. And I feel like they seen that, and it's like, no, we got to try again. Let's try this again. Let's get this right. I actually really like that energy. Another thing that comes out of this that I'm actually happy to hear about is them actively saying it doesn't feel like Netflix. Something's not right. Yes, like hell yes. What? I that's like it should be music to everybody's ears to me that like because we everybody has been worried about the tone that Kevin Feige about the MCU that we're looking for in order to shepherd in Daredevil into this specific universe. We were all afraid that it would not fit Netflix, that it would be too childish, that it would be too funny, MCU, whatever weird tonality going on here coming into Daredevil. But them saying, oh, these episodes aren't really not don't resemble the Netflix version at all, and then kind of not being okay with that, that feels like also like a good thing to me. It feels like they're also like, okay, let's get this character back to where they need to be in order for us to feel good about it, for people to say, oh, Charlie Cox is on screen, this feels like the Daredevil I know. Not only that, but Born Again is a big story. That's a thing that if it doesn't feel like that, I'm not sure it'll work because it's so dark and so gruesome. I'm not sure it'll work. So that's also good news to me as well. What I am worried about is I guess the push and pull of writers in MCU currently. There's a lot of firing of directors and writers and all these other things. Why aren't we getting it right the first time? That's the other thing I'm worried about now. Why do we constantly have to get new writers? It happened with Blade. Why do we have to get new directors? Why are we missing the mark the first time? I think is my worry, because this didn't happen that much in the first couple phases, right? Like it was like, oh, blah blah blah's writing it, blah blah blah's directing it, and then it happens. Oh, it's a good movie, cool. What is happening now recently that's making Marvel hires again certain writers, certain directors. They go on for a little bit. Marvel's like, ooh, I don't know about this. That's not working, and then they scrap it. What's wrong with their procedure that's getting us to this point to again even have this conversation of letting people go with 7 8 episodes in the bank? We shouldn't have even got this far, you know what I mean? And so I don't know, man. That's another thing I'm worried about. But again, I think I like this idea of Marvel finally somewhat being self-aware, finally vetting some of those ideas with in-house, watching a couple episodes before continuing the rest of the season, and then being able to make decisions based on the future of a franchise. Daredevil's big, man, and I think they realize that. So I know a lot of thoughts there, but man, it's kind of bittersweet in a lot of those ways.
Yeah, I think Daredevil is the one unique proposition in this whole television experiment that they've been doing for the past couple of years, insofar as that there is a series that we already have a template for. None of
Mm-hmm.
these other characters like Miss Marvel or Loki or She-Hulk had a series beforehand. So they're starting from scratch. They're building it from the ground up as much as they have done with their previous projects. Obviously, the comics and adaptations are there, but we've never seen anything like those shows in live action.
Right.
Daredevil, we have 3 high quality productions, great seasons of television that
Mm-hmm.
are mostly beloved. And so now they're picking up the baton, and it's supposed to be a soft reboot, but they haven't really clarified that. We don't really know how Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio are going to fit into this larger multiverse plan, or if it's the same interpretations of the characters from Netflix. Like, we don't have any of those answers. And so the expectations and the anticipation level for that show is obviously high because so many people wanted those characters to come back. And Charlie Cox, Vincent D'Onofrio, John Bernthal, whoever you want to name as a part of that cast, they were so pitch perfect that we just wanted them back, and we wanted the shows back. We didn't want them to
Mm-hmm.
change. And obviously Marvel and Disney, they have to do things differently. It's not going to be a 1-for-1 comparison to what we got, but as you're filming, if you see that you are not capturing the essence of it, if you're not
Mm-hmm.
capturing the spirit of what those shows were, then you are already failing. And I think you're already starting to work from behind, because people are probably going to reject it, because those shows they're so beloved, and people still go back to rewatch them and enjoy them. And so I agree that I am glad that we are taking this opportunity to step back and try to improve it. That doesn't guarantee that it's going to be great. They can
Exactly.
redo it over and over, and it could still turn out to be shit. That is very
Mm-hmm.
likely a possibility, but I am at least I think pleased to hear that they are starting to look at things and to really assess, like, we're not hitting the mark that we need to hit. And this is a heavy hitter. There's a lot behind this. There are incredibly high expectations. We got to do what we can to try to make it right. Even if we
Mm-hmm.
can't completely remedy everything that's been shot, some things we'll have to use and bring over, but we got to clean house. And so a part of it is like, okay, they are trying to take care of it, but this is going to become an incredibly expensive television show. Like that is
Yeah.
going to be just like an astronomical price tag to do all of this work, because you're also hiring essentially an entirely new staff. And to get to your question about what's happening here, why are we making it this far to, have these creatives and these filmmakers on and finally have this realization that it's not working? I think this next section kind of speaks to that. But what I also want to allude to before we get to that stuff with the whole philosophy of Marvel TV, I think honestly, they've just been for a long time, especially on the TV side of things, they've been hiring people that are underqualified. That's just a reality of it. And that's not to take a shot at anybody that's working on that stuff. Like, these
Mm-hmm.
people have credit. They've been working in the industry. But when you're talking about big budget, effects laden type of work that's all being shot and produced at one time, that's
Yeah.
also not being shot and produced historically like television has for the past 7 decades, you're asking a
Mm-hmm.
lot of a person to make that transition, because these people probably have worked on TV shows that operate more like traditional TV in the past. But now you're bringing them over to this Marvel house style, to this Disney juggernaut, and they're dealing with all of these different departments, probably thousands of people, all the effects houses, all the people internally. It's a lot of anybody. And if you're bringing on people like Chris Ord and Matt Corman, who just quite honestly haven't been working all that long, they have credits, but we're talking about, 5, 6, 7 years of experience. Is
Mm-hmm.
that really enough to be shepherding something of this magnitude across the finish line? I don't
Yeah.
know. And I think that Marvel historically is like to hire people that have come from independent backgrounds, or maybe they have like one or two things under their belt before they take on a big Marvel project. That's
Mm-hmm.
largely work with the film stuff. They've been able to achieve that. You look at Taika Waititi, you look at Ryan Coogler, you look at those
Right.
directors who didn't have a ton beforehand. They come over to the film side and it works. It does do well. TV, entirely different machine. And I think we're starting to see that you probably can't operate under that same type of philosophy and expect
Mm-hmm.
the same results, which leads us to really, I think, the key thing about this article that Boris Kitt wrote, which is like the most eye-opening piece of it, even more so than the Daredevil Born Again stuff, because we were just speaking about all of this stuff. And again, it is that change in philosophy, apparently, for Marvel Studios. One of the things that I think we long suspected, we kind of knew, but this article really just kind of confirmed all of our suspicions, is that all up until this point, for the past 3 years, all 9, 10, 11 shows, however many it is that they've been making, this company, Marvel Studios, they weren't commissioning pilots, which has been done in television for,
Mm-hmm.
again, I
Mm-hmm.
think 70 years.
Yeah.
Instead, they are shooting these things all at once. Most of these productions cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 million to $200 million. They're shooting them like they're movies and essentially cutting them up to be
Mm-hmm.
6 hour episodes of television. And also, there weren't showrunners, which historically, for the better part of 30 or 40 years, showrunners has been a true sort of staple of television, like directors are for film, showrunners are for TV. But Marvel, they weren't hiring showrunners, and instead they depended on their film executives in-house to run their series, very much like they do with their movies. And it also, as a company, heavily relied on the post-production process and reshoots and pickups to kind of fix things that weren't working. If they saw that
Mm-hmm.
things weren't, going the way that they planned, then they would obviously fit in and schedule in those reshoots and pickups. We saw Secret Invasion went through a lot of that. There were months and months of
Yeah.
pickups. And this article
Mm-hmm.
also talks about the battleground essentially that was kind of drawn on Secret Invasion, some of the arguments that happened that led to just the creative differences on that show. And there's a quote here that I want to read before I get your thoughts, but it comes from Brad Winderbaum, who's currently, sort of the head of streaming television and animation. He says, quote, "We're trying to marry the Marvel culture with the traditional television culture. It comes down to how can we tell stories in television that honor what's so great about the source material," end quote. So again, that comes from Brad Winderbaum, who is leading pretty much their streaming and television operations over there. But yeah, what do you think about all of this? What do you think about just seeing, again, I think our suspicions confirmed that they just haven't been making TV like TV has been made,
Mm-hmm.
a proven, tried and true strategy that's worked for, again, like 70 years. They've decided to just not do that. Instead, try to shoot things like movies and see if that process would work. And I think by and large, we can both agree that it just has not worked up until this point.
Yeah, it's just sometimes you don't listen, and then you get hit upside the head, and then you start listening. And I think that's what Marvel's doing, man. I really, again, I still feel like it was a little bit of cockiness on their part to not just be like students of TV when it was time to make TV. They felt like it really was the opposite. They're like, we're Marvel. We'll make a movie and cut it up and call it a TV show. And that's exactly what we got. And again, it's funny because in this, what I would call success stories of WandaVision and Loki, specifically WandaVision, it started out giving homage to TV. And that's part of the reason why it was working, because they had to make episodes in their actual TV
The
show.
irony in that, right?
The irony in that. And so it's I think it's really funny, man, that unfortunately it took long, but again, this is still to me good news. It'd be different if they were like, no, 6 episodes for the rest of forever of Marvel TV shows. But they're finally addressing this stuff. We've already addressed this stuff again and everything. I literally just talked about showrunners, which is really funny. But I have to say this is good news, man. I think I'm excited to hopefully see real change, because Marvel has said a couple things, or we've even talked about how they seem to be self-aware sometimes, and then they turn around and do the same thing a couple seconds later. Fortunately, this does feel more like a straightforward way to really put your heart on your sleeve as Marvel, right? And say, look, these were our problems before. We weren't having pilots. We weren't having showrunners. We weren't doing all these things. And coming out and saying, okay, we're going to fix these things. And like, I really like the idea of marrying Marvel culture with traditional television culture. Again, I wish this happened a long time ago. It should be in day one. We're making Marvel TV shows, put the post-it note on the board, marry the two cultures. But instead, it took us years to get here, but better late than never, man. And I really hope that this goes somewhere.
Yeah, I think honestly, if we rewind the clock a little bit, a part of the blame here has to be placed on the leaders over at Disney who were in charge over Kevin Feige, because
For
we
sure.
can't forget that once Disney Plus launched, all of a sudden all the companies within Disney, Marvel, Lucasfilm, Animation, Pixar, they all had a mandate to create quote unquote content for Disney Plus. They had to create a ton of new stuff, and that would require you to really start to ramp up production on many projects that probably weren't ready, that you were intending to make, but you didn't exactly figure out the formula. You didn't exactly iron out your strategy to get them ready to go. I think that the turnaround time on this stuff, like we found out about Disney Plus publicly, and then it launched in a very short time frame. It wasn't like this long lead time. We didn't know about Disney
Right.
Plus for 5 years. We suspected eventually Disney would launch its own streaming service, but it was a pretty quick thing. It was Bob Iger's sort of final swan song before he retired. Obviously, he came back, but then you all of a sudden require all of your creatives, all of your divisions to say, like, yeah, now you're going to go from 3 movies a year to 3 movies a year, plus 4 to 5 television shows a year. That is ridiculous. You were more than doubling your creative output. You're more than doubling the resources that you have to inject into all of these different productions. That is just, it's crazy. It's really crazy to think about. And so while obviously, yes, I think some of the blame is put on Marvel because execution is a part of the formula at the end of the day. And we've seen the challenges and we've seen the stuff that went on behind the scenes with Secret Invasion, and She-Hulk had replacements and Moon Knight had its stuff. All of these things could, ultimately be avoided with better planning and a better strategy. But it is good news. I do agree. It's just one of those things where it's like, man, I don't know why this light bulb didn't go off to begin with.
Exactly.
Why was the hubris so present to such a degree to think that you can just film things like you've been filming them for an entirely different medium? It just doesn't work that way. We've seen television has worked the way that it's worked for a very long time now. Like, there's no need to change it. It ain't broke. Like, it's there.
Right.
And the fact that they decided to not have a writer's focused approach to any of this stuff, it's so strange to me. You can't just have the executives who've been there working on movies for 10 plus years all of a sudden figure out TV. And this article also notes that they do plan to hire TV specific executives. I know you noted that when we talked about the state of the MCU, you said there needs to be a Kevin Feige for movies and there needs to be a Kevin Feige for TV.
That's it.
And that's what they're going to do. They're going to hire TV specific executives. We should have done that from the get-go. They are going to have showrunners. We should have done that from the get-go, but that is a good thing that we are eventually going to get to that place. But it's kind of mind-boggling that a company so large and so adept at making such great stuff as Disney and as Marvel I mean, even till this point, 3 years into the game with this TV and streaming stuff, like it took this long, but the Secret Invasion debacle, I think was probably think it was
Ooh,
probably the
yeah,
camel or the straw that broke the camel's back, along with,
yeah.
seeing that Daredevil's not working because, we all know that became like the worst reviewed anything in the MCU, and you never
Hmm.
want that associated with your brand. Last quick piece of news I want to get to. This is related to TV, but it was also outside of this article. I think it was broken by the Direct. Apparently, the Ironheart series has been pushed back significantly to 2025. They essentially found sort of the copyright that had been sort of issued out by Disney and Marvel, which has now a new release date of September 2025. We know that series was initially supposed to come out literally this year. Like it was going to come out this
Yeah.
fall, essentially a year after the character of Riri Williams made her debut in Black Panther Wakanda Forever last year. We heard earlier this year that it was going to get pushed back outside of 2023, but now it's going to ultimately result in more than a 2-year delay. How does that make you feel? I think, sort of in connection to all this other news, to know that, it's just going to be a long time before we see that character.
Man, I don't care when it comes out as long as it comes out right. To be honest, you know how I feel. Get Riri right, and I'm good. It doesn't have to be next week. It doesn't have to be tomorrow. But when it does come out, as long as they do it right, as long as they take their own advice and they do the best that they can actually do, I really have no complaints with Ironheart getting pushed back at all. Again, you could worry about maybe Dominique Thorne getting older, but she's a black woman in her 20s. I'm not worried about what she's going to look like at all, even. So I have no qualms with this at all.
Yeah, and they already filmed a lot of it too. So whatever pickups they do, it's probably going to be minimal. They have filmed most of the show. They completed principal
Mm-hmm.
photography, so it's gonna just kind of sit there for a
Yep.
while. I mean, I a part of me is thinking like, well, they're pushing it back because we've heard Bob Iger and Kevin Feige talk about slowing down, taking their
Mm-hmm.
time between projects, which I do think is a good thing. We kind of need less of this stuff. But also, man, it's a slippery slope too, because again, like what where are we going with all of this stuff? Like when we
Mm-hmm.
talk about the Avengers movies that's supposed to wrap up everything. Well, what's Ironheart's place, if any, in this
That's
whole
true.
equation if her series is going to come out mere months before the Avengers movie? Like, is that the best sort of situation for her? I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, because we don't know what her role will be in that movie, if she
Right.
even has a role. And I could be, very much getting ahead of myself. So in theory, I'm fine with it as long as it is good. But at the same time, it does just raise more questions about
Yeah.
seeing any of this stuff. Like, I think we're existing in a place now where it's becoming a little bit more and more likely that certain things might not come out. I was listening to the Watch podcast, and Joanna Robinson, she has a new book out, MCU The Reign of Marvel Studios. I'm like nearly done with it right now. It's super, super good. But she talked about how she has heard, this can't be confirmed, but she has heard that the Wonder Man project that was rumored has been disregarded. It's been trashed. That it's not going to
Mm-hmm.
happen. And I'm just kind of worried that might become more of a reality now than it has been in the
Yeah.
past. Usually Marvel
Mm-hmm.
projects, like, they always happen if they're usually announced. There's been like 2 examples where it's like, oh, that didn't come out, like Inhumans. That was like the one thing.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
For the most part, when they announce something, it makes its way out. So, last thing I'll just ask you, like, does that, even though like we know that it's been filmed, like, you think we might get a Batgirl situation on our hands? Like, is it at
Ooh.
all possible that we just might not see this, just all these delays, all these changes in their formula? Like, does that worry you at all? That's potentially, sort of a possibility at play.
I think it's a small possibility. I don't think it's like Batgirl level possibilities because, like you said, principal photography is already wrapped up. I feel like they feel okay about the show. I think the piece of that you were speaking to of where does Ironheart fit into all this, right? I think that's the piece that does worry me a little bit. Could if it was to get scrapped, of like, oh, they could. They're probably restructured as we speak, right? Just the MCU in general. Everybody's trying to figure out what's going on over there. They could easily be like, oh, Riri may not fit into the story how we thought we were going to fit into it. Let's get her out of here. And if, unfortunately, that definitely is a possibility. It doesn't happen often, like you said, but these next couple of years between, again, writer strikes and the restructuring of Marvel, it's all scary. You never know what's going to happen. In fact, Batgirl to me scared the hell out of me in general. I don't know what is right anymore. Like I know
Yeah.
I can't bet anything is coming out until I'm sitting down watching it. Like that's the only time that I know something's going to happen. And so I think the possibility is there, but I do think her making an appearance in at least, Wakanda Forever, and them even telling us that Ironheart's being pushed back, it does give me faith that all of this is still going to happen in the Ironheart court, but nothing's out of the realm of possibility anymore.
Yeah, very true. And I also wonder about the Armor Wars connections. Like now that's going to be a
Mm-hmm.
movie. Apparently there will be tie-in between her character and Don Cheadle's Rhodey. Will Armor Wars come out before Ironheart? Will it closely coincide? Might they release in the same year? A lot of questions at play that we will have to stick by and see.